Good morning to all you lovely people at Balham, and all of you lovely people at Battersea, and all of you lovely people at Westside, and to all the lovely people watching online. And I'm sure there's lots of lovely more people who will be listening later in the week. Aren't we all lovely? This is going to be a different kind of talk this morning, so I'm going to give us a little bit of context first. Many of you might remember that we did a series at the beginning of the year about the mission of God and the city in which we live. We talked about all the wonderful things that this city has to offer, as well as some of the challenges that it brings. The culture and convenience that we enjoy, and the hurry and the hardship that we struggle with. And some of you shared how you engage with this city by finding your identity and your purpose in God's city, or what we would call the kingdom of God. And that's what we see here in our midst. Whether we're in Battersea and Westside or here at Balham, we are citizens of that heavenly city, seeking first the kingdom of God, experiencing the presence of God, and reflecting the character of God in the places where we live. And yet we live in that tension, don't we? That sort of overlap between heavenly and physical city, as though we have a foot in both camps. But now it's as though there's a pull in another direction. There's no longer just this overlap of a heavenly and a physical city. We live in a third city, a digital city. A city which has only really existed for about 30 years. And yet one way or another, it impacts all of us and the way we live. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Life in the digital city, or how to remain human in a digital world. You up for that? Great, because that's what we're doing. First, we're going to take a trip down memory lane, just to remind ourselves how we got here. Then we're going to think about what that means for most of us. And then we're going to consider whether there's another way to live. So the first question we're going to ask is, how did we get here? After all, some of us have never known life without mobile phones. And others of us might just vaguely remember growing up without a computer back in the day. Most of us are dependent on the digital world for our careers and our community, and many of us do feel its impact on our mental and emotional health. But it hasn't always been that way, has it? The World Wide Web, as we used to call it, became available to the general public in 1993 via dial-up internet service. So who remembers the sound that made? There's nothing like it, is there? By 1995, you had a massive 25,000 websites to choose from, including a new online bookshop called Amazon. By the year 2000, almost every adult in the UK, except I think my brother-in-law, had a mobile phone, or a dumb phone, as we used to call it then. But less than half of UK households had a computer. Phones were used just to call people or send messages. I mean, can you imagine that? And we accessed the internet via that rather clunky, chunky thing in the office or the corner of the living room that looked something like this. But if that wasn't revolutionary enough, there was more change to come. By 2004, the web had become more participative, with more accessible and interactive sites that you could engage with, including digital social platforms. Sites like MySpace, Friendster, and Friends Reunited. I see some of you smiling here in Balham. I guess you're doing the same at Battersea and Westside. They led the way, pioneers, whilst Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn followed, providing social and professional networking services. But whoever it was that you wanted to connect with online, you were still mostly doing it on a computer in a particular space. Until the arrival of the smartphone. And in 2007, Apple's iPhone landed. The iPhone combined all the functionality of a computer with the access of the internet, the convenience of a device you could fit in your pocket, and more processing power than NASA had to land a man on the moon. And not long after this, a new kind of social networking platform was launched, one that focused on photo and video sharing. Instagram came onto the market in 2010, and once it was bought by Facebook, it reached 7 million users worldwide within a month. That's in addition to the 1 billion users on Facebook at that time. Today, 1 in 3 of the world's population visit Facebook every day. So you might be wondering where you were in all this, and whether you grew up predominantly in a world shaped by a digital presence or not. Because at some point, of course, the balance tipped. So where are we now? In the 2010s, social networking systems developed into publishing platforms that switched their focus from connection to content and curating your feeds to attract and keep your attention for the benefit of advertisers. Camera phones made it easier to create and share this kind of content instantly, and high-speed internet access enabled video posts to appear in real time and be consumed quickly before moving on to the next thing. These days, you can be watching a cute cat pouncing on a reflected light, followed by some political disinformation, a bit of toxic masculinity, a twisted conspiracy theory, some religious extremism, some highly sexualized content, and even a violent act of war. But oh, look, there's that cat again. And maybe you're okay with all that. After all, TikTok prefers to call itself an entertainment platform these days. But what if the way that we see ourselves is shaped by the content we consume? And not just by the content, but by the way that we engage with it. What if we are shaped more by addictive design and distant algorithms than we are by the wisdom that we claim to live by? How would we know? And how do we feel about that? The digital world has, of course, become increasingly inseparable from our physical world without a health check for humans. The velocity at which technology has gone from the lab to our pockets and the rate at which it has become an integral part of our lives is unprecedented. How humans engaged with the world for thousands of years, how we learnt, how we socialized, and how we worked together has shifted significantly. So perhaps we should just stop and ask ourselves about the potential impact of all that. And as people of a particular faith, whether our digital engagement reflects what we believe about ourselves, the world, and the kingdom of God. So I'm going to suggest just 4 ways in which we might be feeling the impact. And I'm afraid the news is not good. The first of these is fairly obvious, and it's social or relational. According to the Campaign to End Loneliness, in 2022, 50% of adults in the UK reported feeling lonely. As of February 24, that figure is now 58%. Some of us might recognize ourselves in those statistics, but we should all be asking, how on earth can that be possible when we are as connected as never before? Perhaps it's because it's not the kind of connectedness that we need. Whilst the digital world provides us with the opportunity to connect with people all over the world, it often disconnects us from those closest to us. And we end up seeking emotional affirmation via a flat screen instead, creating the illusion of intimacy online in contrast to the reality of relationships offline. Humans learn how to socialize through the subtleties of body language and facial expression in physical closeness to one another. What we need is eye contact, actual proximity, and physical touch. We all experienced the loss of that during the COVID lockdowns. And yet, even as adults who have learnt our social skills over a lifetime, it was a strange thing to return to public spaces after so much time spent online or in isolation from one another. Digital engagement became a lifeline, and we almost forgot just how important proximity is for us. In fact, some of us understandably choose digital engagement over the messiness of human interaction and the risk of getting hurt, when what we all need is safe, regular, human contact. That will look different for all of us, but it is a vital part of what it means to be human. Another area of impact is our sleep. The Sleep Foundation says that tempting as it might be to use your computer or phone before bed, studies have shown that these devices can interfere with sleep by suppressing the production of melatonin, a natural hormone released in the evening to help you feel tired and ready for sleep. This leads to neurophysiologic arousals that increase feelings of alertness when you should be winding down instead. But it's not just screen use, is it? It's the content. It can be surprisingly hard to get to sleep after a busy day, but the thoughts and emotions triggered by digital engagement don't help with the wind-down process either. In fact, sleep disturbances have been shown to be greatest for those who are online in bed, whether that's on social media, gaming, shopping, or video streaming, even though we can use online engagement to numb and distract us until we fall asleep out of sheer exhaustion. But sleep is not just an inconvenient interruption to our otherwise productive lives. It is something to be treasured and prioritized. It is where our body and brain get to work, processing our experiences from the day, replenishing our energy, and repairing cells for greater health and immunity. It is a vital part of what it means to be fully human. Another area of impact is on our attention. Psychologist and economist Herbert Simon wrote about the concept of the attention economy in 1971. He noted the link between information overload and attention scarcity and wrote that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. Attention is the ability we have to stay on one task, one line of thinking, one mental road, even as other more attractive off-ramps beckon. This is already hard for some of us, but when we are distracted by frequent notifications and other interruptions, constantly jumping from one thing to the next, we retrain our brains for shallow, short-term engagement and end up unable to concentrate at all. It's like our attention-paying muscle no longer has the strength to resist or the ability to focus on one thing for any length of time. It even causes us to crave more distractions, to experience more stimulation. And it keeps us from a deeper connection with ourselves, those around us, and coming up with more creative solutions to the problems we face. But where we place our attention is like a superpower. It is a vital part of what it means to be human. To be the focus of someone's attention, to be lovingly seen and heard, can be life-giving. And the kind of people, places, and activities we pay our attention to will determine the kind of person that we become. So lastly, addiction. When any action is followed by a good outcome, certain brain circuits release dopamine, which feels great and reinforces the original action. It's that feeling that helps us create good habits and do hard but worthwhile activities. It's part of what it means to be human. But it's that same process that's activated by gaming, gambling, social media, and many other online activities. Now, most of us are not addicted, of course. And addictive opportunities have always been available to us. But now you can find them in your bedroom and in your pocket. Now, millions and billions of dollars have been spent expertly engineering them to get your attention and game your emotions, which leaves us feeling understimulated offline and looking for the next dopamine hit online. Because the truth is that many of us feel anxious and disillusioned about the world that we find ourselves in, and we're looking for answers and relief. But too often, digital engagement simply confirms the worst that we believe about ourselves and the world around us, isolating us within our own fear, insecurities, and cynicism. Dr. Lemp is a US psychiatrist who wrote about America's drug crisis in her book, Dopamine Nation. She concluded that it is the relentless pursuit of pleasure that so often leads us to pain. In it, she also writes, "The smartphone is the modern-day hypodermic needle delivering digital dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation," and I think we can all count ourselves in that. "I urge you to find a way to immerse yourself fully in the life that you've been given. So how do we want to live? And do we get to choose? Is there a way to immerse ourselves in the life that we've been given? Now, I'm afraid this is not the point in which I provide you with easy answers or a three-step plan for a digital detox, or even suggest a V61 commune experience where we all retreat to a field in Somerset. Because the question is not whether we switch off our phones and stick them in a drawer, or whether we shrug our shoulders and keep on scrolling. The question is, how will we engage with the world that we are in without losing what it means to be human? Because if we are people committed to the kind of human flourishing we see in God's city, that should mean something for how we live, work, and play in the digital city. And if the question of being human really matters, who gets to define what it means to be human? Well, fortunately, our very own Jo Frost is hard at work on that. She couldn't be with us this morning, but can I recommend you revisit the series that we ran last year on being human, Jo's book on the subject with her colleague Peter Linus, or their accompanying podcast. They bring an incredibly well-informed, wise, and generous approach to all this. Because it's really important to acknowledge that some of us just can't see what the fuss is all about, whilst others of us are reluctant participants in a world we don't really understand, whilst at the same time we're trying to navigate it for our kids. Or maybe we work for a tech company that's wrestling with the ethics of artificial intelligence or the environmental consequences of large data centers. After all, you've got to hope somebody is. Whereas some of us have never thought about the impact of our digital footprint in the real world. Or perhaps you're seeing your career options consumed by AI's large language models, whilst new jobs are being advertised to teach those models to do what you already do. Others of us might be housebound or isolated in some way, and the only place of connection we do have is online, while others of us are just desperate to switch off and unplug from it altogether. The truth is that our relationship with the digital world is messy, just as it is with the real world. Technology can bring positive change to people's lives, just as entertainment can bring us laughter and relief. Tech that offers digital convenience in the 21st century can be just as liberating as the domestic conveniences of the 20th century. But just as household appliances didn't lead to equality for women, neither should we assume that AI will lead to human flourishing just because it can write a better email than you can. We're all just trying to make the best of where we are, making the most of what's there and trying to avoid the worst of it. You like that? But is it possible that we are also like the proverbial frog, placed in a pan of boiling water that just doesn't notice the effect of the heat until it's far too late? We're not anti-technology. We're not anti-social. We're not anti-intelligence. But we are deeply committed to human flourishing, and we should be deeply suspicious of anything that isn't. So what I hope I've done so far this morning is to help us to take a little step back, to recognize where we now live and name some of the challenges that we face. Technology may help us to solve some of today's most difficult challenges, but it will only do that in a way that is good for any of us if we treasure what it means to be human, if we remember what we are capable of, and if we engage with it very differently. After all, we've built pyramids, we've created symphonies, we've cured diseases without it. So let's finally turn our attention to some ancient wisdom and consider the good news instead. You still with me? In the book of Matthew is a large section of Jesus' teaching called the Sermon on the Mount, which many of you will be familiar with. And I'm not going to dive into it now, you'll be relieved to hear, as much as I'd love to. I'm just going to point you in that direction. The Bible Project is currently doing a year-long series on this, which I highly recommend, as well as a recent podcast on formation from the team at Columbus Vineyard, and a classic book called The Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard. Matthew 5-7 is a guide to life in the kingdom of God. In these chapters, we get an introduction on how to live a radically different kind of life. A life of service, a life of substance, a life of purpose. And it is the most pragmatic antidote to anything else the world has to offer. It contains very practical words of wisdom for engaging with the world from a different perspective and becoming a different kind of people. John Stott describes it like this. The essential theme of the whole Bible from beginning to end is that God's historical purpose is to call out a people for himself, that this people is a holy people, set apart from the world, to belong to him and to obey him, and that its vocation is to be true to its identity, that is, to be holy or different in all its outlook and behavior. The Sermon on the Mount is the most complete description anywhere in the New Testament of the Christian counterculture. Here is a Christian value system, ethical standard, religious devotion, attitude to money, ambition, lifestyle, and network of relationships, all of which are totally at odds with those of the non-Christian world. And this Christian counterculture is the life of the kingdom of God, a fully human life lived out under divine rule. This is a beautiful and challenging vision. It will not allow us an idealistic alternative to a difficult life or a future heavenly utopia. These are glorious words, but they are not fairy dust. They are meant to be taken seriously. From the Beatitudes onwards, starting in chapter 5, we are confronted with the reality of human behavior and our limitations for dealing with it, with poverty, grief, greed, anger, sexual desire, and self-righteousness. This is the world as it is. Everything we encounter every day, online and offline. And right in the center is the Lord's Prayer, a prayer for a kingdom-shaped life, the world as it could be. Because there is another way of engaging with the world. Not a hashtag blessed, pick your own buffet of spirituality, but a timeless, uncompromising liturgy for a holy and ordinary life. It undermines the way that the world works, and it does require us to make radically different choices about how we will live. It is not a promise of how we can get more, do more, or be more. But it is an invitation to lay down our lives and seek what God is offering instead. And it's in the midst of all of that that Jesus shares these words, which I've taken from the Message version, and I think are particularly applicable to us today. Matthew 6, verses 30-33. What I'm trying to do here, Jesus says, is to get you to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting that you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way he works fuss over these things. But you both know God and how he works. So steep your life in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now. And don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you. He will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes. So to end, I'm going to suggest 3 responses to all this. 3 ways that we can perhaps disengage with the digital world and re-engage from a place that better reflects the kind of life that I think we really want to live. A fully human and immersive life, a God-centered life, a creative and connected life. I want to suggest that being intentional, being imaginative, and being incarnational are 3 ways that we can reorientate ourselves around a biblical vision of that kind of life and avoid being shaped by something dehumanizing instead. So let's be intentional. One of the worst things about the digital world is this sense that we have no choice but to engage with it and on its terms. But that's simply not true. I've got here some resources that I think will be helpful for us at whatever age or stage you are at. I recommend them to you for helping you think through what this might look like for you, how you can be intentional about the choices that you make. Much happens to us that is out of our control, but we underestimate our ability to make life-giving choices. So whatever digital engagement looks like for you, be intentional about it. Talk with those who care about you. Create new habits, online and offline, that will bring life to you, physically, mentally, and relationally. And be imaginative. What might that look like? How might you remain human in this digital world? Philip Ball, a science writer, wrote this: "The one mental capacity that might truly set us apart isn't exactly a skill at all, but more a quality of mind. We should perhaps have called ourselves instead Homo imaginatus. It could be imagination that makes us human." The more we understand about the minds of other animals, and the more we try and fail to build machines that can think like us, the clearer it becomes that imagination is a candidate for our most valuable and most distinctive attribute. So who or what is filling your imagination? Because it seems to me that engaging with prayer, worship, art, service, silence, community, and the natural world, daily, weekly, or as often as we can, is what brings us alive and makes us more fully human. In fact, the Apostle Paul tells us that's how transformation happens, by renewing our minds. So let's be people that choose to fill our imaginations with what's good and kind and brave and lovely and true. And let's see what kind of people we become. And lastly, let's be incarnational. Our faith is embodied. From God's choosing of a particular people in a particular time and place, to the arrival of his Son, living out his days, dying and rising again in a human body, to the outpouring of his Spirit on all men and women, and the existence of church communities across the earth for 2,000 years, our faith is embodied. It is incarnational. Too often the digital world takes us somewhere else, causes us to leave the room, endlessly distracted and unable to be present to ourselves and those around us. But to be human is to be present, embodied and relational, like this, like we are this morning. Our faith prioritizes our humanity in real times, people, and places, so that we might belong to and be shaped by an eternal incarnational story of life, death, and resurrection, so that we can become more fully human and engage with the world in which we live in a way that truly reflects the kingdom of God. Should we stand? I'm going to invite the bands to come back up here at Balham, at Battersea, and at Westside. We're just going to pause for a moment. This is always your moment, the time in the service, as much as it is in worship or in the teaching, but particularly now, to respond to what it is that you think God is saying to you. God's invitation to us is always to come just as we are. His invitation to us is particularly if we are weary, when we feel heavy laden. And it is always to give us rest. It is always to speak peace, to speak freedom, to speak truth, and to bring life. For some of us this morning, this message will be a reminder. We've set good boundaries on our digital engagement in the past. We have good habits. And some of us just need to remember. We just needed to be reminded. And we may want to come back to those things, revisit those things. Some of us are in different seasons now, and we need to find new ways of safeguarding our spiritual, emotional, and relational health. To be creative, and maybe some of the resources I've provided this morning can really help you with that. But some of us are facing a much deeper struggle. For some of us, it's work, and it's digital intrusion on our family life or other relationships. And for others of us, the digital world has very much got its shadow, overshadows us very much, our emotional and mental health. So whatever it is that's going on with you this morning, can I invite you to engage with that? Can I invite you to respond to that?